Let's review some books. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I thought it would be a great idea to take a look at two of Orbit's upcoming books and give my thoughts on whether you should pre-order these or add them to your TBR. And those two books are The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan and Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham. Both of these books are set to be published in February, and I've been fortunate enough to have read both of these already. So I will give a short review about both of these books and hopefully be able to guide you in your search for your next book to add to your TBR. But first, let's take a closer look at these covers. Both of these covers are decent. I'm not a huge fan of characters on the cover, so the cover of The Justice of Kings doesn't really speak to me, while Age of Ash... Both of these have decent looking covers. I'm not a huge fan of characters on the cover, so the cover of The Justice of Kings doesn't really speak to me, while Age of Ash has a huge mysterious building in the background. If I had to choose a favorite cover, then I'll probably choose Age of Ash, because it has that intrigue. These are not the worst fantasy covers I've seen by any means, but they're not my favorite either. However, I do like the titles of both of these books. The Justice of Kings is a great title, especially considering the themes of the book, while I could almost imagine a Mistborn book being called Age of Ash. The titles of these two books definitely appeal to me more than the covers, but that is not what we're here to talk about today. Let's get into the first review. Let's start with The Justice of Kings. I was supposed to get a physical arc of this book, which I was very excited about since the proof copies are so cool. Unfortunately, the book was lost in the mail, so I had to settle for an e-arc. I am not salty. Orbit Books very generously offered to send me a hardback copy on release day of this book, but I'll be receiving my Goldsboro edition of this book, so I declined. So let's talk about this book. The Justice of Kings is a debut novel by Richard Swan and is the first book in the Empire of the Wolf series. And if you've been following fancy Bookstagram accounts or Book Twitter, then you will have probably seen this book floating around. This book currently has an impressive rating of 4.21 on Goodreads, and has received a lot of praise from reviewers such as Patrick and Nils Reviews It. I knew I had to pick this book up when I read the premise. My favorite parts of fantasy books are always the political maneuvering, the strategizing, the characters and the themes. Although I do enjoy an epic battle scene every now and again, I am much more interested in the conflict behind the battle. And to my pleasure, The Justice of Kings has barely any battle scenes. That being said, Swan was still able to get my heart racing by creating tension and intrigue, which is really impressive. So The Justice of Kings follows Sir Conrad Vonwald, an Emperor's Justice, as he's investigating a murder of a noblewoman. As Vonwald starts to investigate this murder, Vonwald starts to unravel a conspiracy that could see the end of the Empire. Due to spoiler reasons, I won't say anything else about the plot, but in a lot of ways, this book feels like a murder mystery set in a fantasy world. You can see some stuff happening in the background which ultimately will probably lead to the unraveling of some bigger events, but for this book, it's mostly a murder mystery with some fantastical elements. While Conrad Vonwald is the main character in The Justice of Kings, the story is actually told through the point of view of Helena, his clerk. We the reader are reading Helena's account of what happened, so the reader already knows that Helena will at least survive the events in this book, since she's telling you all about these events. In some ways, this book reminded me of the Farseer trilogy. You have this character that has become old and is now telling his or her life story, which works incredibly well in this book. Yes, you know that Helena is gonna survive, but Swan is still able to create so much intrigue and raise so many questions, so I wouldn't worry about this book not having any tension, because it certainly does. This book is told through the first-person view of Helena, so if you hate first-person stories, then this one might not be for you. However, telling the story through the first person was definitely the right choice, and I would encourage you not to let that be the reason for not picking up this book, because this story is really good. While The Justice of Kings initially feels like a fantasy/thriller book, the story gradually integrates other elements such as magic, lore, and battle scenes. I found the story to be utterly compelling. Swan is able to get the reader intrigued in the murder and this world early on. Moreover, tension slowly increases throughout the story, leading to a memorable climax. I was really impressed by Swan's ability to craft a complex story with many different threads intertwining, while simultaneously helping the reader follow and understand the story. Also, Swan's character work deserves high praise. Vonwald is an utterly compelling character, and he's very complex. It's also fascinating to observe how Vonwald slowly changes throughout the story. The other two main characters, Helena and Bressinger, are exciting and engaging. I loved following this trio as they slowly unpack this massive conspiracy. However, what really makes this book stand out is the commentary on law and traditions. This story demonstrates that values and ideals can only survive if people see a reason to believe in them. If a large group rejects a nation's principles and ideals, the government will fall. And that is what I hope to get across here. Yes, this is a murder mystery, but there's so much more to this story. There's a wider conspiracy being slowly unraveled. We have some really great and interesting themes, and we have a fascinating magic system and engaging characters. So who's this book for? Well, if you enjoy commentary on ideals and values, first-person stories, compelling characters, and a thriller/fantasy story, then you should pick up this book. The Justice of Kings is an impressive debut, and I can't wait for the sequel to be published. I really hope that the sequel will include a story so far section though, because I'll most likely forget a lot of the details in this book before the sequel is published. And if you don't believe me, then you can read the review of the iconic fantasy reviewer who has the most adorable dog in the world, Patrick Leo, who I believe has read more than 500 fantasy books. Patrick says, once again, and as expected, Orbit Books has landed a gem in both the cover art and story department. I was able to find one-star review by Kayla, which says, I've had this on pre-order for 2 months, and this morning the publisher canceled my pre-order. I assume simple, so that they can now jack up the price, which is now $14. Well, you lost my money, jerks. What did I just read? So what are my concluding thoughts? Well, I'm giving this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend you checking out this one. I had a great time reading it, and I can imagine most fantasy readers will also really enjoy this one. Next up is Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham, and I low-key hope that Orbit doesn't see this part. Let's get into it. Let's talk about Age of Ash. If you haven't heard about Daniel Abraham before, then he's the author of the Long Price Quartet, the Dagger and the Coin series, and he's also the co-author of The Expanse. I have heard great things about these series, especially from Patrick Leo. I know I keep mentioning Patrick Leo, but you should really follow him. But for some reason, I've never gotten around to reading any of Abraham's books. So what happened was that Orbit Books reached out to me on Instagram and asked if I was interested in reading and reviewing this book. So they sent me a copy, which I was really excited about. Thank you, Orbit. And this finally gave me an excuse to read some of Abraham's work. So, what did I think? So let's briefly talk about what this book is about. Age of Ash is the first book in the Kithamar trilogy, and it follows Alice, who is our main protagonist. Alice lives in a district called Long Hill, in the city of Kithamar. And this next part is not spoiler, you can literally read it in the synopsis. Alice's brother is suddenly murdered, which obviously leads to a lot of distress for Alice, who then becomes resolute to determine what ultimately happened to her brother. However, Alice is unexpectedly swept into a conspiracy that will threaten the future of Kithamar as we know it. So let's start talking about what I enjoyed about this book, because there are definitely some elements that I thought were great. I have frequently heard people praise Abraham's prose for being rich and beautiful, and I can finally understand why he received such praise. Abraham's prose is absolutely wonderful and is rich with beautiful descriptions and exquisite characterizations. In some ways, reading Age of Ash reminded me of Robin Hobb's books. Abraham does a phenomenal job at creating atmosphere and tension. Moreover, Abraham is not afraid to spend considerable time fleshing out the main characters and this world. While the reader doesn't get much insight into the whole of the city of Kithamar, the district of Long Hill is masterfully brought to life. The reader gains insight into the culture and the grittiness of Long Hill. So basically, Long Hill is one of the poorest districts in Kithamar, and its people face many hardships and challenges. And Abraham does a phenomenal job at making the reader experience how ruthless Long Hill actually is. Reading how challenging it is to live in Long Hill really made me appreciate how blessed I am. I have financial stability, I live in a safe city, I have so many things that I should be grateful for, and experiencing the district of Long Hill made me realize how fortunate I am. Moreover, Abraham does a fantastic job at introducing our main character, Alice and Samish. These characters are complex, troubled, and are struggling with grief and their identity. While I didn't necessarily love how these characters behaved at times, Abraham does make an effort in justifying their actions, and you as a reader kind of understands why they behave in certain ways. Age of Ash also has some fantastic themes about grief, loyalty, family, friendships, and overcoming hardships. And you can definitely talk for hours about how Abraham handled all these different themes. Age of Ash isn't some brain-dead action book. It's a book that deals with some heavy themes, and that's what really stood out to me. However, while there's much to love about Age of Ash, the second half of this book fell flat for me. Abraham spends a considerable time fleshing out the main characters and setting up the plot. And unfortunately, it almost feels like the book didn't really start until the 250 page mark, and this book is only 430 pages. While the story really starts to pick up at the 60% mark, this was just too late for me. I kept reading this book since I could see that Abram was building towards something. However, the payoff just came way too late. Unfortunately, I started losing interest in this world and its characters after 200 pages of barely anything happening. And when things finally started to pick up, I didn't care enough to try and get fully reinvested in the plot. While I don't mind a slow burn, this book could easily have been 50 pages shorter in my opinion. This book has a lot of great things going for it, but I do worry that a lot of readers will feel similarly to me and might even DNF this book before the plot starts to pick up. It's a big ask to ask readers to read almost 250 pages before the plot really picks up. Now I know that some readers will disagree with me on this point, which is fine, and they'll probably say that Abram needed to take his time before escalating the plot. However, I've spoken to some other reviewers that feel the same way as I do, and judging by the star rating on Goodreads, it seems like I'm not the only one that feels this way. Moreover, the tone of the story was a tad bit too depressing for my taste. Age of Ash is not a story filled with hope, love and happiness. On the contrary, this world is rough and is filled with injustice and adversity. I don't mind a fancy book that focuses on heavy themes. For example, I love Joe Abercrombie, who is famously known for his grim, dark stories. However, what Abercrombie does so well is to mix in humor and occasionally hope into his stories. I felt that Age of Ash really lacked hope. Reading this book made me feel a bit down, to be totally honest, and that might have been Abram's intention, but for me personally, it did lower my enjoyment of this book. So what are my concluding thoughts on this book? Well, I can imagine that Age of Ash is one of those books that will make more sense when the whole trilogy is published. While I did enjoy several aspects of this book, such as Abram's writing, his characterizations, and some of the themes, Abram unfortunately was not able to get me fully invested in this world or its characters due to its very slow pace and its somber tone. So if you are looking for a book with beautiful writing, great world building, or city building, and interesting themes, then it's worth checking out Age of Ash. Unfortunately, I do not believe that I'll be continuing this series, but I would recommend you to personally read this book and make up your own mind. I'm therefore giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars, because although it wasn't for me, there are some aspects to this book that deserve praise. I want to give a special thanks to Orbit Books for sending me a review copy of Age of Ash and an e-arc of The Justice of Kings in exchange for an honest review. And that is it. Are any of these books on your TBR? Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. See you in the next video.